Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to today's INSEAD Tech Talk series. And today's webinar is part of our Tech Talk X series by Digital at INSEAD. Before I get into the topic today, I'd like to do a few housekeeping. Audience is muted with video off and the chat is closed. But please use the Q&A tab to suggest questions for the speakers. Questions should be kept short and to the point. To help us identify the most relevant questions, you can vote on the existing questions. The webinar is being recorded, and if you need any tech support and experience any tech issues, please email to digital@insead.edu. So Accenture has been a really long-standing supporter and partner for our effort at Digital at INSEAD. And we've been working in the last decade, but interestingly, it's the first time I am hosting this tech talk and welcoming our partners from Accenture. So I'm very excited today to have Emmanuel and Frederic, and we will be discussing the key insights from Accenture's latest Tech Vision 2025 report. This report examines the critical roadblocks as well as opportunities in the adoption of AI. I would also like to share with everyone that at INSEAD, we're very engaged with the teaching and research on the AI topic. For example, we recently just announced the plan to launch a Human and Machine Intelligence Institute, which supports interdisciplinary research as well as teaching for the topic of AI. So before we get into today's key insights from Tech Vision, I would love Frederic and Emmanuel to have a brief introduction about themselves. Frederic?
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Lily, for having us today as part of the Tech Talk. Really look forward to this one. Myself, I'm based out of the Zurich office. I'm leading our technology strategy team for Accenture globally. That spans across all industries and all sectors and all geographies, obviously. And myself, I'm more like a banker, right? So I work personally predominantly in the banking industry, and I look very much forward to the conversation today. Emmanuel?
Thanks, Frederic. Thanks, Lily. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So I'm Emmanuel. I'm part of the technology strategy team where I lead the emerging technology group. So looking at the future of technologies, etc. I'm based in Sophia Antipolis in the south of France on the beautiful French Riviera, but I operate globally. And in terms of industry background, a lot of insurance and banking, and also a bit of automotive. So those are my two, let's say, industries of focus in the last several years. And very glad to be exchanging with you, Lily and Frederic.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Frederic and Emmanuel. So before we get into the Tech Vision report today, actually, I'd like to do a quick poll with the audience if we can. Can we launch the poll? Great. So the question is about the biggest obstacle that you see or experience in scaling AI in your organization. Very interesting. I don't know if the audience can vote multiple ones or if this is a single choice vote. These are really good questions. Okay, so we have more than 80% of the votes coming in. The number one response is skills and talent gap. 42% of you voted that as the number one obstacle in scaling AI adoption. And the second highest vote is for cost and ROI uncertainty. So, and number 3 and 4, they are almost equal, 17% and 14% respectively is a trust issue, 17%, and governance and compliance, 14%. So, Frederic, Emmanuel, is this surprising to you that skills and talent is the
Yeah.
number one?
For me, it is actually. I can see why the answer is the answer, right? That skills and capability has been voted as the, as the one with the major backdrop. But you will hear us talking a lot about trust and governance as one of the big backdrops and challenges to scale AI. I would say all 4, honestly, are super relevant in the context of scaling AI across the enterprise. But we find that in the boardroom and the board of directors, from a regulator perspective, that the whole topic of AI governance, the whole topic of trust in particular, how much of autonomy actually do you allow an AI to have in the connectivity between AI agents is also at heavy debate and one of the most significant challenges to overcome in scaling AI. Emmanuel?
Yeah, I think, trust and transparency, I would have expected that's number 1, indeed. So very interesting feedback from the audience here. We'll come back to those elements. I think, trust and transparency would have been my number 1 guess from what I hear.
Interesting. I think that this dovetails really well into the discussion of our report, but I also think that it reflects something that's a difference between businesses' immediate concern. I can see that the talent and skill is for many businesses the immediate concern, but in the longer term, when you really think about the foundational shift that this technology really means, I think that, quickly you will get to the conclusion that the trust and governance issue is ultimately perhaps the most paramount, topic. So let's get into, the report and today's proper, topic proper, which is first, I would love to, know a little bit about tech vision in general. So tell us, Frederic, a little bit about what is tech vision, how long has it been running, and what's the philosophy, and story behind it?
Yeah, very good. Very happy to do so. So it's actually our 25th edition of the Tech Vision that we launched back in January this year. It's the 25th, and what we do and have done over the last 25 editions is we are taking a very, I would say, systematic look at the overall enterprise landscape, so cross-industry, cross-sector, cross-geography, on which technology trends have really the most potential to disrupt businesses and industries. That is the lens we apply. So which trends have the most disruptive potential? And it's a vision for us. The cycle is a 3 to 5 year time frame. And we make it actually quite, I would say, approachable and pragmatic, which means that we are talking about those trends and visions that are really starting to have some activation already today, but they have not reached the full disruptive potential that we will see, from our opinion and our research, in the next 3 to 5 years. So that's the lens. That's the lens we apply. How do we do it? It's actually super comprehensive. We have had interviews also in this study with 4,000 senior executives of our clients. So these are typically N-1, N-2 senior executives to get their opinion voiced on the theme. Second, we are doing surveys. We have done a survey, 12,000 customers, to get the data points as part of a questionnaire in this. We have done this across 21 industries and 28 countries. So it's quite comprehensive. It's global in nature. And we have also worked with 20 academia, research institutes, firms to, proof point and get some research on the back of it to make it relevant. So that's the approach we have taken. That's the lens we have taken. The study this year, which we launched on January 2025, has the theme of AI to it. Because we see AI is not a new theme. AI have been there for many years, for 20 years, 20 plus years. But what we clearly see as a mega trend now is that the AI-like human adoption of capabilities is significantly gaining in speed. Just look at some of those curves in respect to human-like capabilities and how long the adoption has been taking in the past and how long it takes now, for example, on code generation. I'm just coming back from a trip to Asia Pacific this morning, and it's fascinating where one of the banks there in Australia, in fact, has applied 80 agents across the development lifecycle in technology and has created an autonomous system almost to get coding done at speed with very little like human interaction. It's oversight controls, and the adoption curves is just very rapid.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess, it's very foresightful. 25 years ago, you started this, research series. I think it's an annual report, and you've probably seen a few different topics popping up, in through the 25 years, right? This must be the most, prevalent topic nowadays. And indeed, this is super exciting to be talking about this right at this moment. So let's immediately get into today's, this year's release, your report this year. So what are then the, key trends that you see that you uncovered in this year's report? This is really, I think, on top of mind for all the business leaders. And how is the AI integration changing the enterprise architecture? I mean, the example that you brought just now, Frederic, that is a massive scale adoption by the companies on this. So how is that shaping, the architecture of enterprises that you see from this, not just this one client, but also, through the thousands of clients that you've interviewed in this report?
Yeah. So our theme, as I already mentioned this year, is all about AI, and we call the title of it a declaration of autonomy as the title. So a declaration of autonomy that we see in 3 to 5 years and starting already now with the adoption. And the one example I gave on coding was one good example. And the tech vision explores the potential of especially Gen AI as an evolution from AI and the augmentation into agentic AI that is at the forefront of the discussion these days, as it ripples across multiple dimensions of an enterprise. It includes the dimension, and you see that as the 4 mega trends on that slide. It includes the dimensions of one hand side, the technology development cycle. It includes the brand and the customer interaction, which is your face in the future. It does also include taking shape. AI is taking shape in the form of humanoids, as an example, and it explores the vision and the impact on what this has on the workforce and the collaboration between AI and the human. These are the 4 mega trends underlying there.
I see.
It's also the most significant change, I'd say, with AI is now its ability to learn on one hand side, and its ability to reason at the other hand side, and as a consequence of reasoning, the ability to make decisions if we like it to, in an autonomous way.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes back to trust in the end, on which level of control we want to give an agentic AI system autonomy to make decision.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just briefly voice over the trends 1 to 4 and what that means and give you a couple of examples. So the underlying trend 1 is all about, I call it the amplified intelligence between the human and the machine. It's about how you redesign the end-to-end development chain. Think about the IT department, from designing systems, building systems, deploying systems, running systems, with AI and Gen AI significantly accelerating that development lifecycle, but also as a prerequisite, fundamentally changing the enterprise architecture. And when I think about the enterprise architecture, this is not about the application architecture, it's actually the business architecture. Because as an example, if you support today a relationship manager of a bank in the branch or in the call center with AI, Gen AI, you can almost deploy an agentic AI system that works independently and requires minimum RM interaction. And the RM only comes to play when there's really a human-to-human interaction and conversation. But meeting preparations, next best advice, next best product can be run in the background in an autonomous fashion. And we see some of those cases already becoming real. Again, I talk about Asia Pacific because I was just there this week, and it's fascinating on what's happening in this area. So that's one. The second one, think about if you deploy AI, Gen AI, agentic AI at scale, and every company does it, how do you actually differentiate?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Especially in the B2B field. How do you differentiate? Because if everyone has access to the same capability and the intelligence comes from the machine, then the only way of differentiating is how you architect the journey and how you implement it within the governance, within the risk appetite, within the controls. That is going to become the key differentiator in the future. So the how plays a fundamental role in AI and Gen AI, agentic AI systems in the future.
Mm-hmm.
When LLMs get their bodies, think about physical AI and robotics like humanoids taking stage in the manufacturing industrial chain. Autonomous manufacturing, autonomous factories, and Emmanuel is going to talk about this. We're going to have actually also a bit of showcase an example on this one with one of the clients. We have done that at scale already, but it's automation in manufacturing and humanoids taking center stage as a consequence. And the last one is the new learning loop. Think about dynamic skills. We see a major impact on the tech fluency required in the C-suite to understand and learn from AI and also understand the reasoning. So tech skills in the C-suite is at the center stage, becomes more and more important. Equally, it does become more and more important also in the interaction between human and machine. And that learning programs, those decision making, the bilateral collaboration requires new skills, different skills, and is a huge opportunity at the same time. So in summary, I would say autonomy is for us to decide, because it's for us to decide on which level of control we give AI, on which level of governance we apply on AI, and then as a consequence, how fast and how rigid we are in scaling AI for an enterprise.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for, a great summary of all the main themes coming out of this year's report. when I actually first saw the title of the report, I thought it was really interesting because you are saying, AI declare autonomy, and I think that actually there is this question the other way around, which is that eventually when the AI becomes so powerful, we human beings need to make sure that we remain autonomous, that we remain our human agency. I think that these are the themes that are explored by some really leading, thinkers on this, right? Including the recent Nobel Prize winner, Jeff Hinton, as well as, Stuart Russell, who wrote this book, human compatible and so forth. So that leads to the really fundamental question of control and governance and so forth. But let's unpack each of the main findings that we discussed just now with the report. So Emmanuel, I'd like to turn to you. So I mean, how does this really mean for enterprise, for enterprise architecture? What's the impact of AI integration that you see from your, the report?
Yeah, so thank you for the question, and going into in particular trend number one, we touch on this with Frederic. So we mentioned the term agentic already. It's not just about agentic, and I was looking at also the Q&A, the live questions. We'll come back to those, of course, in more details. But overall, on this, indeed, and as Frederic already hinted at, it's the way we design, we build, applications, we integrate ERP systems, etc. What we've seen, just to make it very concrete in that space, is Salesforce, Microsoft, and some other players like Adobe, providing tools for more the creative, creating content, all are starting to change the way they approach their suite of software to be exposed differently. First, being equipped with more AI capabilities. And they are transparent now. So the Agentforce part of Salesforce is essentially provides the same capabilities to the Salesforce to manage your campaigns, emails, your portfolio of clients, depending on the way you use Salesforce, of course. But going forward, they started to announce just at the end of last year in 2024, Agentforce, which makes it a bit more autonomous. And here, back to your point earlier, the autonomy and how the sales force here, the sales rep, the CRM, the agent, depending on the end users, the human, remain in control. Essentially, it doesn't change much about the way they use today the tools, but gradually they are starting to expose through agent, whether it's a chatbot or integrated naturally. Like I'm guessing many people in the audience already use the Copilot, the Google tools, etc., for their personal use, and that gradually again goes back to your point fundamentally of humans remaining in control. I may even say for the generative LLM exposed elements that actually the technology speaks to us in our language, and we can see if there is some what they call the term hallucination, AI hallucination. It looks good. You may have experience on ChatGPT or any other platform at the very early stages a couple of years ago. But hallucination is, oh yeah, it looks good, but it's actually inaccurate and even completely wrong. So I think here one element, going back to this example on the trend number one in particular, first it's one element on remaining on control. The second, if we look at the way we could see in the future, and agentic is one of the buzzword and the big trend we see rising more and more, is that the tools become agent exposed. So from microservices, application as a service, microservices types of approaches, it creates another layer, which is much more understandable, which can provide more autonomy or not. So you can switch in on and off and use the feature. And if I may be provocative, with the Salesforce, Adobe tools, and others that are starting to expose, this is where you can have the, interconnection, more autonomy or not, depending on how trustworthy you think, or in your enterprise processes you deem as relevant to really go towards more and more autonomy. Okay, so that's one element, and I touch on a few examples, but I think for the sake of time, I'll hand back to you, Lily.
Yes. Yeah, so the examples you brought up, right? Kind of these agent force from Salesforce. I mean, it seems to be like for these large platforms, this is their edge. They can deploy this embedded into their software. But for the companies themselves, I mean, this raises a question that Frederic touched on at the very beginning, right? how do then the client companies like differentiate themselves, because everybody has the same tools, everybody is running, the same speed. So is there a quick, insight coming from like how do companies maximize the value that they're getting from this? Everybody is getting more powerful. So
Yeah.
how do companies, is there any?
Yes. So
Yeah.
I think, maybe picking this one as well here in terms of, and your face in the future, if you remember, this is the title of that
Yes.
trend, which indeed is when you have more capabilities, more quality, meaning quality in terms of course, the chatbots that we have seen already deployed, over the past several years. Now, of course, the understanding of our questions, whether voice in the app, on the website, is of course to another level. Of course, that's a given. That's great. Also generating content. Again, think about the media companies or the brand as ads. Those have reached a certain level. So, and as Frederic was saying, now differentiating. Well, you can build on top of that, which is, and again, depending or not in the level of autonomy is another dimension, but essentially is, I would say, the holy grail of CRM for years, which has been on, from customization, from segments to personalization to personification. And those are not just buzzwords I'm mentioning. It's really the, each end customer, whether you're in the B2C or B2B2C, obviously context, but the holy grail is each customer is his own or her own segment. And so here, first you can at scale manage. And so we have smaller examples or in completely different industries. I'm thinking Weight Watchers, for example, providing nutritional coaching at scale, of course, globally. They are in France, they are in many countries, and how they've started to use certain specific form of AI to really address, first to interact, when you interact with your virtual coach on Weight Watcher, or, likewise on Instagram, they have the same, or Sirius XM, it's a broadcast company, think of it as a Spotify in the US and other geographies. But when, all these are very specific. So when I'm, interacting to get a playlist or to get my next meal, if I'm following a coaching from Weight Watcher, there comes with a lingo, comes with, of course, my profile, my persona. And so that's a given, but that's already really adapting and making it closer. If you expand and building on the rest, it's, the next step would be how can I really at scale manage still with the human dimension, think about banking, the relationship manager from the mass market all the way to high net worth, individuals, in the different segments. You can manage at scale those customers' interactions, but really answer very specific questions of the complexity of financial products to all people equally and with a personalized, personified element. So that touches on many dimensions. And here again, not perfect, but we start to see with the few examples I gave, some the Instagram, I really touch on it. It's creative.ai. It's a new platform, very interesting, that they use to address, millions of followers of influencers at scale. And essentially the influencers can go to sleep wherever they are while still, managing their hundreds or thousands of fans and followers. Now, again, might not see directly applicable to businesses, but if you look at the core technologies and the way of interacting, I think we see some applications there.
So if I'm right, you're saying that, this ability to almost go hyper personalize, hyper customize, and this technology is no longer just resting in the hands of, big tech companies, but even, individual content providers can even, utilize the technology to do that. So essentially this technology is cheap enough and accessible enough that everybody can use it to do personalization and customization. That's actually kind of a very powerful. I didn't think about this element that not only just the big banks can tailor their solutions to each customer, but even individual content providers, they can also do that. That's really quite interesting. Okay, and then so in terms of, can you tell us, the third trend? I think that, we discussed the first one, which is how, kind of enterprise infrastructure would change. And second is how this personalization, how would brands and, differentiate themselves and enhance the customer experience. But there's a third, kind of mega trend that you identified, which is the the physical world, right? The humanoid and, you know, AI combined with robotics. And this is obviously, I think that this is a real new frontier that we're opening up, because on the one hand, you can have nightmare scenarios, especially when the alignment of that technology is not, you know, done well, the governance and trust is not done well. But on the other hand, it could be extremely enabling, right, in terms of many different industries or care for human populations and so on. So can you tell us a little bit more? This is super exciting, I think.
Yeah, and I'll have a short video to illustrate concretely in a second. But yeah, indeed. So it's not just about the humanoid, but, you know, robotics, meaning I was with an automotive player a few weeks ago. You know, those were talking about 500 specialized robots, you know, on the line of manufacturing. Some are painting, some are welding, some are assembling, some are riveting, etc. And over the past several years, we've seen, you know, another trend, of course, around robotics with precision, you know, in the mechanical aspect, in all aspects of the hardware, you know, making huge progress in terms of precision, complementing the human. It will be a good segue to the last trend and again, the autonomy versus the control and the interaction. But on this one, you know, one to take for granted and still progressing about the hardware. Now, still, you know, how you program, how you script, how you give orders, you know, for specific tasks along, again, an assembly line, for example. And this has also involved to be all the way to cobots. Now it's about not just programming, you know, changing and cycles of changing the way, you know, particular tasks has to be carried out. It's also all the way. So that's the provocative title when LLMs get their bodies to say, well, now robot move 3 centimeters on the left side when you're doing this, or, you know, whatever you can imagine in a very simple, natural way. And so that's, again, not necessarily new, the cobot topic, right? Human and robot combination. But then again, here, the interaction, the VLMs, you know, the visual language models and different other characteristics have progressed to, you know, bring more safety, more elements. Now, when we look and we look at this, it's how, of course, on one side, looking at automation, but also looking at more of the safety, more the human and robot collaboration. So here, just to bring it to life, let me switch to the perfect. Perfect. So here we have the, you should have in main screen the running video. So it's a bit of a element. So that's a project we have started with Kion. So it's a manufacturer in Germany, and you can see it's a normal plant, you know, with some storage areas, with some you know, elements. And here it's about all, you know, beyond just the robots. So you see some robots carrying boxes, autonomous, some humans, you know, going around. Of course, you have some visual cues for the humans on the ground, but the point here, it's all first virtual. So how we build this digital twin from the get-go of a particular factory, and how afterwards you have the simulation aspect. It's not, you know, so here you have this world simulator. We're working with NVIDIA as a provider of the technology, but it's looking at the broader picture, the processes, you know, where machine are going to do what type of tasks. Of course, at the core, the worker safety, you know, and again, going back to your point and comment of us human remaining in control at any given time, that's also has to do with the human aspect and behaviors. And afterwards, you can see on obviously how we can optimize, you know, from an existing factory. Here you see a 3D scanning, and afterwards, you know, so that's the physical AI, if I may summarize, right? It's beyond just the robots, the humanoid robots, or just plain machine as we know, and how they can work 24/7. You may have read the term dark factory, not that because they are evil, because there is, you know, 24/7, and sometimes humans come in, sometimes they don't, and of course they are dark because we shut down electricity, I mean the lights. But this is an example of how you can touch on many aspects with physical AI, which has to do with, again, the simulation, adapting production, adapting shipping, modifying, you know, on the lines of assembly for personalization of the final product, be it a car or whatever type of appliance. And this is what we encompass if we broaden a bit the topic here.
I have a question on this, actually. This is really, really amazing, very impressive. I do have a question, which is about this, which is that, is this a really new thing after the Gen AI has come onto the scene, kind of in 2022? Or is it some of this kind of deep machine learning based automation that's already happening, right? I mean, what's the difference now suddenly, like, kind of
Yeah,
the
so
yeah.
yeah, I think one, and Frederic, feel free to jump in, of course, and add. I think one is, again, and we touch on it a bit at the beginning. We've had through the curves, which were just illustrative of the human side and AI. But I would say, not perfect, of course, but the technology elements. Here we talk about macro trends, obviously, but if you look at the technology, part of the survey goes about, about this and that technology sub areas and how they have progressed, what level of maturity, cost, etc. So what's new? I mean, yeah, if you look at some of what we just illustrated were around a few years ago, but now it's how you can do it faster, and also part of standardization and interoperability when we start to connect, different systems. Like I said, on this particular example, the fact that, there are different type of robots with different standards, we can actually, let's say, get rid of some of, or not get rid, but build on top of particular, messaging protocols or others, and that evolves from going back to the, not just Gen AI, but the broader AI and supporting technologies. Again, I didn't mention, but in the video, you had a whole lot of 3D graphics. You had a whole lot of complex simulation and underlying problems. So it's not just about AI, but also more computing power, at hand. So all this is what is kind of new. And when you start to assemble, and with new standards or things that are being standardized, and technologies that are cloud native as well. So we can come back afterwards and debate, obviously, about the pros and cons, but that compared to the past couple of decades of technology evolution, this is what's fundamentally new and provides challenges, but also we see, of course, opportunities.
And maybe one add-on. And I've read through some of the questions. I would actually agree with many of the comments and questions put in the text. Remember, we are talking here about a vision and a trend, right? We are not talking about this is all real today. We are showing on where we are convinced the world is moving, and many of the topics raised. For example, many of the companies are not making money with it. Value case maybe uncertain. All true, 100% agreed. But that's where we see the adoption taking shape. And I would also like to answer some of the questions as we then go through the questions.
Yeah.
One topic I want to highlight again, and Emmanuel has said it. We see the trend in deploying digital twins. That is very disruptive. If you think about the Kion example, we are basically building the full manufacturing area in a digital twin. We are piloting, we are testing before we deploy anything. This is also as one of the key, I would say, investment areas where we invest as an Accenture. So we're convinced if you have a digital twin, think about a digital twin for your company. Think about this. Think about you deploy it, you test it, and then in 3 years from now, you put it live. Think about strategically that direction, and that has massive disruption potential.
Yeah, it's potentially a massively cost saving, and you save, you avoid the mistakes, right? Once you do physical build, it's hard to reverse mistakes. So all the design things you think through. So it's a little bit reminds me of these design tools that, decades ago, architects, they have these design tools, computer aided design thing. This is kind of at the massive scale, the entire plants or company that is going to be, you can simulate that. So before you build it. So I want to touch on this begs the really natural next question, which is the fourth mega trend, or, we want to watch out for, which is what is the impact on employees? Because all of this, I mean, again, you can enable complement, but at the same time, it puts quite a lot of threat, right? So what is that's the fourth trend I think that you see, right?
Yeah. So if I may just jump on this one, I mean, and say, I would say it's the last trend, but it's the one of the most important, if not the most important. In our tech visioning, for the past 25 years, as we said, repeatedly when we had waves about the internet, and intranet, etc. Then we had IoT, digital, about 10 years ago, still going on, right? And it's not. And now what we've seen in the past few years, and in particular, AI, it's been central to obviously, every major waves coming, right? So that's maybe a given, but to remind everyone, who have been on, looking at these waves, this is important. Now, going into this one, obviously, and, it touches on some of the messages we shared around, autonomy, the remaining in control. This one, what's interesting is this, learning loop is actually fundamentally AI and different subcategories, etc., is about a learning technology, right? So if you look at what we have put in place for years to monitor, to put in place business processes about rule-based mostly and predictable, here we have, seen these different sub-areas. Gen AI is one example, but AI machine learning, that came already 7-8 years ago with a new level of maturity and scale up, right? So those come with fundamentally the learning, the technology itself, or AI as a group of technologies and subdomains is a learning by default. And so here the natural, without being philosophical, element is how, again, there is complementarity between the two. And it's not just obviously some of the applications about automation, obviously with cost reduction, that's one. And to be honest, it's not necessarily new. We've seen this with RPA, robotic process automation, going back to even more than 10 years ago, where some processes were about sending faxes, very, error prone, very manual, very tedious. And obviously that came naturally and so forth. So here we can transpose and learn already from, a few decades of a massive evolution. This one, what we believe in is essentially through the different example we're going to touch on, but are around this learning loop and how it changes and providing new opportunities. For example, and it started, by necessity with the pandemic and COVID to find quickly some new vaccine, right, to get, 4 or 5 years ago. And this has been maybe an accelerator, but now, in the what we call in silico biomedicine approach, it has different names, but how AI technology is supporting more and more the research and development of new molecules, of new vaccines, of new drugs. This is being more and more included in the process of those industries. And, even if you look last year, for the first time ever, the Nobel Prize in chemistry was given to 2 teams and using only AI and what we call in silico as opposed to in vitro. Again, it's a combination. It's not getting rid of, hundreds of years of research, etc., in a traditional way, but it's combining. So that's, sorry, one example. The other one we touch, on already about code generation and other elements. So you have Wayfair. It's a company in the US just for their IT department. So Wayfair, they provide online so website where you can buy online furnitures. So it's not about their core business, but it's about how they provide, evolution to their website and apps, and they onboard new developers with their way of coding, their patterns, their DevOps. So another completely extreme example, or completely different examples to connect with trend number 1, but where again, onboarding developers, having a more agile, so those have been around for years, how you go to the next level to, across different countries, different parts of the organization, make sure you have much more agility. And that's an example I like.
Yeah. I can add just a little bit of observation from, academic research I've seen. I think that for a lot of people, everyday people and leaders, business leaders, there's a lot of fear about, is this going to automate away a lot of jobs, even white collar jobs, let alone, blue collar jobs. In fact, ironically, there's some thinking that, white collar jobs are even at more risk or exposure because you have these automated, kind of code generation and all of this. And I think a lot of research actually shows that, there are going to be lots of kind of tasks that's going to be automated away and generated faster and do a better, enable people to do better. Is very few hold jobs, because in the end, these models and these tools are not yet at the level of general intelligence as human intelligence. So I think that there is this, and I actually see that it echoes some comments that was made in the chat, that we're a little bit getting ahead of ourselves. And also I think that this fear of massive automation away of jobs is probably overdone. There's a lot of current research that we are actually doing to see which segments of the workers are more or less impacted, exposure, both positively and negatively. So it would be great to have a conversation about that later. Now, this is just about time now. We have about 15 minutes left to entertain some of these questions. Lots of really great questions, a very active audience, and really appreciate it to answer some of these. And I will let Frederic, I think you read them, and Emmanuel, you may also have read. I think I'm going to pick one that is quite mundane, okay? And I think it's on our mind, a lot of people, which is that, in fact, a lot of companies, actually, their IT system are in a mess. You're talking about this frontier of all of this, right? The shiny kind of simulated futuristic factory. But how do we take the first step? And how do we address this issue of lots of companies, basically, their own IT systems and backbones are still in a mess.
Yeah.
And reality and the future is quite distant.
I'd agree, and there's also one question in the chat, what's limiting the scaling and the adoption, and that's one, right? That's one. The data foundation is not there. The data quality is not a given, and we used to say garbage in, garbage out, right? Which is still true. The data quality is one of the prerequisites. That obviously has implications changing to data architecture, enterprise architecture. Who holds the golden source? How is data sharing taking place? And so forth. So there's a lot of, I would say, technical prerequisites to make it scale, to make it work. And our perspective on it, and what we see working, is it needs to go hand in hand, in parallel. Because if we start to clean the data foundation for 3 years, the investment appetite is not there, right? We have learned from the past where huge data transformation, data foundation programs have not gone well because the return on investment takes 3 to 5 years. And that tenure is not even for the C-suite a typical cycle. So I'd say there is no general recipe, but deploying AI in alignment with cleansing the data foundation is a hand-in-hand proposition.
Just maybe to add, I think a few years ago in one of the Tech Vision, we were talking about data supply chain. So that's sometimes trying to do data migration, adapt to more easily access, cross, not non-siloed, depending on the way the enterprise is architected from a business, from an IT, and so forth. So that has been ongoing. Now there are different tools, techniques, approaches about data mesh, knowledge graph, for example, that try to, in a much more cost-effective way, still they won't solve the data quality problem, obviously, but in terms of being able to leverage much more the data, synthetic data, you need more data. How do you generate and isolate? So there are some supporting what I call underlying trends, that help in solving those particular issues. But indeed, as Frederic said, it goes with how the broader approach is taken.
So for sure, I think in reality, there's lots of challenges, but the future is going in a sense that intelligence, right? Not only individual, leaders and workers, but also intelligence of the whole company is going to be the competitive edge for companies. So how do you build that intelligence layer through technology, through your data? And data remains the new gold, right? If you don't have the data in order, then forget about getting intelligence out of the data. So what you said is so insightful and very helpful. Kind of, it's not hopeless, but you need to start in that building that prerequisite. So that's super interesting, and thank you for sharing. I want to ask from the audience another question I think a lot of people really care about, which is that you refer to, Frederic, C-suite requiring tech skills. And I think that this is, what kind of tech skill do you think that C-suite need? Because they're not going to be coder. In fact, there's no point to become coders because coding is now done by LLMs. So what are the type of practical suggestion that you can give to senior leaders, C-suites, for tech skill upgrading?
Yeah. I allude also to another question in combination, because there was a question on what is the reporting structure of, for example, the IT department. It has also to do with this. Our perspective clearly is that the CIO or the CTO, and sometimes we have both in combinations in the products world in specific. They should be part of the executive board and the boardroom of a company, given the dynamic that we see, and should not be reporting into a CFO, COO, CFO, or likes. They need to become peers to adopt to emerging tech and also help their board members to become more tech fluent. So when we talk about tech fluency, is think about in 5 years from now, you really build an agentic system for your front office, for the call center. It's a practical example because most of the companies have call centers. If you do so, whoever is responsible for the distribution arm of that company should understand which recommendations are given and why they are given this way. So the tech fluency, understanding what the machine provides as a recommendation or as an outcome, remains a prerequisite to build trust into any solution you're building. And that requires tech fluency to understand how those recommendations or outcomes are generated, at least at the macro level. So, for example, what is actually at the C-suite? If you ask today a C-suite member, let's say a COO, what an agentic solution is, and you ask that in 10 companies, you get 10 different answers. And they're not consistent, and some of them will not be able to provide that answer. So that level of understanding is what I mean with tech fluency. Reasoning, I agree also with the comment. LLMs today are not set up for doing reasoning. In 3 years from now, the solutions we build around it will be, in our perspective, set up to do human-like reasoning because they will be trained to do so. Then again, it depends on the level of controls you deploy, but also the controls is typically a C-suite, C-level task. So how should the controls actually look like? And how do you control the technology? Also, that type of tech fluency are, some practical examples. And the third one, and there was also a question, is understanding the EU Act or the US Act on AI. That also contributes to what I say tech fluency, because understanding, for example, does the EU Act has a disadvantage? Yes and no, because if you argue along advantages, it protects data privacy as an advantage, for example. But it may not be as speedy to deploy AI at scale vis-a-vis the US, right? The US allows scaling faster. The China regulation provides the highest level of agility, for example. But someone who is operating at the C-suite and operating a global company will also need to understand where and how to deploy what. And for example, I'm working with a company that, for exactly that reasons, starts with deployment of AI, Gen AI in the US and not in Europe. They do it in the US and then have the plan to scale it back into Europe as a practical consequence.
I think one of the other challenges, thank you for your comment on what it means to be tech, what does tech skill means for C-suite. I think the other challenge is that the speed at which this is all happening. So is there any kind of practical suggestions you can make in terms of, kind of how do people stay ahead or like understand the next thing or be able to tell this is a something that they need to pay attention to versus not, because there's just a lot of we are drinking through a fire hose in some sense, right? Like the amount of information and speed of which things are changing, not only the technology itself, but also potentially regulations and everything. So yeah.
No, I think just going back to the basics, I think, and this is what we applied to ourselves in Accenture, so uh, of course, following, demystifying, and going by numbers and data and where it provides value. So here, for example, we just ran a survey and we'll sure make it public soon. But again, in the financial sector, what are the value pools? In other words, the use cases. And again, going towards what we said, automation, cost reduction, it's efficiency, and then on the value generation, revenue generation, a typical value tree that we've used for years and decades. And here, so going to say, okay, now this is happening. There is a breakthrough. We read every morning on the news and the new LLM or non-gen AI or whatever, and see a bit, okay, how does it apply? And going to again, back to the basics about what value it will generate. Will it answer a current pain point in the organization? Will it help further optimize the problem we have with a value chain, whatever? You see what I mean? So this is kind of a way to going back to the basics like we did with digital 10 years or started to do, with the digital wave 10 years ago, and started to say, okay, how do we apply? If you remember at the time, we had analytics, we had SMAC, some of you remember, social, mobile analytics and cloud as very, very early stages. Now, we take them for granted, but it was a similar approach and the way we adapted. So I think it applies the same. Afterwards, indeed, and Frederic touched it very well on it, which is, okay, now we can do many things. We need to quantitatively look at the value.
Mm-hmm.
And afterwards, what can we do? What is, in our business as a company, as our values, as our with our clients, whether again, we are in the B2B or B2E, B2C, approach, how does it, can we apply? We could do it at a cost. We can do this now, but should we? And so forth. So I think that's maybe a bit generic what I'm saying, but this is something we've seen working extremely well to pick where to start, where to go, what to prioritize, and where to prioritize our investments toward these technologies.
Yeah, that's really very good, because I think that it's almost dizzying, kind of the amount of information. But I think that your suggestion of going back to the really fundamentals and basics and looking at the value pool, I like that terminology, the value pool, like where are the processes, key ones where I really need to pay attention to. That's maybe a very good guiding principle for executives. So one kind of question, I think, then we wrap up, which is somebody asked about, what has been, is there any study, kind of looking at the extent of AI adoption and financial of market performance? I want to say that we are literally doing that study right now. I think using existing data for the last few years, it's not obvious, right? Because, and you don't even need to wait for the academic study to come out to understand it's not obvious yet, because you can see the market reaction. Some companies, when they talked about their AI, the stock price went up. Some others, didn't. And there was a lot of question now about the cost, of companies putting into AI, not really getting kind of monetization from that. From your clients, I mean, because they're maybe mostly kind of private and we don't have market data, do you see kind of, is there any general conclusion, or is it still the jury is out there?
Emmanuel?
Yeah. This maybe, just very quickly, if there's anything, or you see like it's very context dependent, maybe that's the answer. I don't know.
That's I was about to say the context dependent. It's also with the the last comment about obviously the problems. I mean, to adapt. So yeah, context dependent. Yeah, otherwise, sorry, it would be too long. So sorry, Frederic.
No, there's also one other point in that context I wanted to raise. There are companies and companies, twofold. There are companies that are convinced that AI is so disruptive, and they have a corporate belief and a corporate decision to adopt AI. And the end state will look very different to companies that go pilot by pilot and say every pilot has to prove its value. And then I scale on a piecemeal basis. So I think really, unfortunately, there is no one size fits all answers. But we see both categories. I'm not saying one is better than the other. But the first one is really putting, money and budget aside, independent of the here and now value case, because they are convinced the disruptive potential is so large that they need to invest in it in any case. Yeah.
It's
And
almost a governance, or philosophical difference in terms of how companies are approaching. Maybe that should be something that you want to look into in next year's report. That would be fascinating. Yeah. So great. So I think that we're just on the hour, and thank you so much. And thank the audience for great questions, and we will hope to see you soon again. Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.